Great. Hello, everyone. My name is Gemma Wood. I'm the Monitoring and Evaluation Manager at the United Nations Trust Fund to End Violence Against Women. And this is the second session in the 10-part mandatory training for UN Trust Fund focal points for our projects, for those of you who have just awarded a grant. This session, Module 2, is focused on project planning. And next week's session will be focused on planning for data collection. So Module 2 and 3 go hand in hand, actually. And I sent you a guidance document that contains guidance for both this session on the results framework and chain, and also for next week's session, next Tuesday on data collection. So welcome to the second session. This session will focus on planning your project. We'll focus on how to improve your results chain and better plan your project for improved likelihood of success. Next week, we will look at preparing for data collection, monitoring and evaluation, such as how to design indicators and data collection methods. And as before, you will receive a short survey after each session to test your knowledge. So now I'm going to share the screen. So you should be able to see the PowerPoint presentation. I've also sent you the script and the PowerPoint in an email. So the objectives of this session are firstly to help you understand UN Trust Fund project management, to understand our requirements, what you need to do and when in terms of planning, monitoring and evaluation of your project funded by the Trust Fund. And really we'll be elaborating on last week's session, or 2 weeks ago, elaborating on what we expect to help you comply with our project cooperation agreement. For many of you, you're project management experts, so this will not be new to you, but it might be helpful for you for us to explain what it means to us so that we both have a shared understanding of how project management principles apply for a UN Trust Fund grant. So for those of you who are already project management experts, much of this won't be new to you, but it hopefully a good reminder. Secondly, we will explain why we use the results and resources framework as the primary tool for project planning and monitoring. You may use other things like logical frameworks and other tools, so that's why we'll explain why we use the results and resources framework and how you can use yours and improve it for better chance of results. Thirdly, we'll focus on, very specifically in this session, we will look at the results chain part of your results framework. So we won't cover indicators or data collection today. We will cover data collection and indicators next week. This session will just focus on your goal, your outcomes, your outputs. And we will touch on what's called theory of change, a project management tool to help you plan your project. And we'll show you how to use some of these tools and how to question and interrogate your results framework to make sure it really is the best plan for you, and so that you and your portfolio manager in the UN Trust Fund can start the project on a mutual understanding and a shared understanding of the project. There's something very basic to understanding the results framework. You may use terminology we may not understand. You may use abbreviations. That would be very difficult for us when we come to read your reports. So on a very basic level, for you to look at your results chain, make sure it's as clear as possible, means it's easier for everyone to monitor the project and see what progress is made. Throughout this session, I will be referring to a document I sent you, which is guidelines on formulating the results chain and the results framework. This is actually the document that you may have received when you were writing your proposal. But because some of you may be new to the project, you may not have seen it. So that's our primary source of information. But you will be sent more guidance. We have more guidance as part of our manual handbook more guidance on data collection. So the one I sent you is the first one, but you will receive further support. So that's what the objectives of the session are. They'll take about 1 hour, I would say, and then we'll have time for questions at the end. So as a refresher from a couple of weeks ago, I was telling you about the project cooperation agreement and explaining what some of the terms mean, and it can be a little scary that someone has signed this document. It's a legal document, so what does it mean for you as an organization? So I'm going to go into more depth now on the terminology in that agreement on project results, because that's the focus of the session. So I encourage you to read back, always refer back to your project cooperation agreement that was signed, and you will see that it mentions these terms. It mentions that you've agreed to carry out this agreement and to undertake the project. And by the project, we mean whatever you said in your project document, and that was your proposal. But attached to that proposal is the results and resources framework, and that comes as a package. So when the agreement talks about the project document and project objectives, we are talking about what you put in your results and resources framework. So we expect you to make some progress towards those results as stated in your results and resources framework. And attached to that, we have annual work plans, the project work plan. And these are the steps you have set out, including the budget, that are necessary to achieve the project results. So you have signed up to achieving results as per the results and resources framework. But we want you to feel confident that as per normal project management rules and procedures, this is flexible. You may have to revise your project plan. There may be unexpected things that happen year on year. And the results and resources framework is now a working document that at least once a year you can refresh. You might need to change something. You might need to delete an activity. You might need to add something. So this is a working document. And you will have the opportunity to review that results framework and annual work plan to ensure it really reflects what you can achieve and when within the budget. You can't change the overall budget. You can't change the annual budget, but there will be an opportunity once a year to revise the plan. Unexpected things always happen, especially if you're in a very difficult political environment. We've had situations where obviously there is natural disasters happen, or maybe a partner drops out. So we know unexpected things will happen. As mentioned in the first training session, you will be able to adjust your activities and budgets during the first year, every 6 months around your project reporting. If you have minor changes to make, and you are allowed to make minor revisions to the budget if it's under 20% variation between activity lines. But in terms of larger revisions, we ask you to wait and do that maybe just once a year. So the basic message is, yes, you've signed up to achieve the results in your results and resources framework. That is why we do this session, to help you make sure that you agree with the results that are set out, that you think you can achieve them, but that you will have the opportunity once a year at least to change your plan if it's needed in discussion with us. So what are project results? It might seem obvious, but sometimes different donors and different organizations have very different terminology. We want us all to be on the same page and understanding of the terminology. When we talk about project results, the UN Trust Fund and most of the UN break down these results to different levels. And we call these different level of results the goal, the outcomes, and the outputs. And I'm going to explain what those mean. And really what we're talking about when we're talking about project results is the positive change that you seek to make. It's a positive change in the lives of women and girls. It's how you expect the situation will change, whether something will get better, so we hope that violence will decrease, or whether a law will be put in place, or women will be better protected. Results are not activities. So if you've had a chance to read your results framework, you will see these different levels. And at the very lowest level, there's something called an activity. And that is not a result because it's not really a change. An activity is something that you do. So right now, I'm giving you training. But that doesn't mean anything has changed. You may not come away with this training with any new knowledge. I might have failed, I hope not miserably, in demonstrating what we're expecting you to do, but that is an activity, the training. What the result is the change it leads to, whether that's a change in your knowledge, a change in your understanding. So it's very important to understand the distinction between what you do as an organization and what result you expect to achieve. And we focus in our reporting on results. And we want you every 6 months to report, hopefully, on the actual change that your activity is leading to. So when you see in the project document and the project cooperation agreement referring to results, we don't want you to report on all the little things that you've done, like putting in place a plan, doing training, writing a report. We're interested in what change that is leading to, and hopefully the change for women and girls. What are some examples of these? What are project results? In example one, an activity could be that you're building a women's center. You're building a physical building or room or center for women to come to. The actual building of the center is an activity because it's manual labor, it's building its bricks. If you just build a center, there's no guarantee that it will be used, that women will access it. The result from that would hopefully be that women come to the center, and this is just an example, you could use any other example. Women would come to the center and they would access social support and legal services. So at your activity level in your results framework, you may have activities such as building centers or writing information notes, writing pamphlets, but it's actually what the women and your beneficiaries do with that is the result. Another example could be that in your projects you're going out and training the community. You're sensitizing them about sexual and gender-based violence. But the actual moment that you're sensitizing them and training them, you can't be sure that any change, positive change, will happen. The actual change will come later when you go and ask them, well, how do you feel about the training that I've given you? And that's the result, that potentially community members have greater awareness about violence against women, and they may go on to show greater support for women's rights. So many of you will know this already, but we just want to remind you that for us, the UN Trust Fund, and for most donors and organizations, the focus is on results. And everything that you plan should be focused on, why am I doing this activity? And will it lead to a result? So when you come to reflect on your results framework after this session, check the levels that you've written, the different results you've written, and double check that they are actually results and not simply activities. So that is what a project result is. And to get to project results, you have to manage your project well. And the process of project management is something that all of you are doing day to day, I imagine. To get from activities to results, we really have to plan well, implement well, we have to set up a team, we have to have money, resources. We're going to go through that in other sessions. We have the session on financial management in a couple of weeks. We have a separate session on operations. So project management is the whole package. And in the aim of managing your project well, You would hope that you're managing a project well within the budget, managing your risks, but the aim is to get to these results. The aim is to get from A to B. There's no point getting a team together, staff together, money together, equipment, and not having a focus on, well, what change are we trying to achieve? What is the result we're trying to achieve? And that result in this area of human rights is ideally to end violence against women and girls, or to see a step. So we want you to keep the focus on that, and all of us to keep that focus on everything we do. Is it going to help change? The journey will not always be simple. In this illustration, at the bottom there is a straight line. At the top, from A to B, there is a wiggly, squiggly line. And the reality is that change is never linear. And that's why it's so important that we reflect on your project plan now and make sure that you haven't just simply seen it as a straight line, and that you've had the chance to reflect and consider what are the unexpected things that might challenge you in your project management of getting from your activities to your results. So over the next few months, we will work with you to reflect on your project plan and make sure that you have something that's realistic. When managing violence against women projects, in addition to the standard practices in project management, we also expect you to very importantly adhere to certain principles. And again, we will have other sessions in this package on these principles, so I'm only giving you a highlight here. Of course, we expect you to adopt a human rights-based approach in everything you do. That might seem obvious, but we have had issues in the past with some projects where perhaps some project staff do not fully understand their own internal biases. So this is an opportunity to reflect in your team. We encourage you to, wherever possible, be inclusive of people with disabilities, inclusive of people of different sexualities, inclusive of people of different ethnic minorities. You may not target these groups, and that's fine. Your project may not be targeting, but just to make sure that you're aware in your team that everything you're doing is as equitable as possible, as fair as possible, and that there's no internal biases within your organization or within your project staff. Secondly, of course, we expect you to operate ethically and safely. This means that you reflect on any harm that you could inadvertently be doing through your project, and that you have protocols in place so that if your project staff are being sent to dangerous places, obviously that you would have safety procedures in place. If you're asking survivors personal questions, you're not asking them in ways that would re-traumatize them, and we will have a whole session on that. Obviously, we expect you to ensure everything is gender responsive. Again, this seems obvious, but sometimes you will be surprised if a project is very focused on men and boys as a secondary beneficiary. You may forget to reflect and ask the women and girls their opinions. So always still consider whether your project is gender responsive. Make sure it's culturally appropriate, that it's very focused on the forms of violence that you're tackling. This is important because we've found in the past that some projects will be too ambitious and they will try and focus on everything. If your project is trying to focus on intimate partner violence as well as violence in the public spaces, as well as violence in schools, you may be trying to do too much. And we find the projects that are most successful focus on specific forms of violence and are very clear on how they will tackle those forms, rather than trying to tackle every kind of violence everywhere, because there are different strategies for tackling different forms of violence. And of course, everything that we do, we ask you to be as survivor-centered and as empowering as possible, and that you use existing evidence. And that's where we come in on the last one. You can ask me, you can ask portfolio managers, what is the new evidence in your area of work? What is the best way to, what are the new methodologies on prevention? So bearing in mind those principles that underline project management, what are the primary stages of project management when it applies to the UN Trust Fund project? Sorry. So, as most of you know, as project managers yourself, some of you, it's very typical stages of project management. We expect you to plan your project, implement your project, monitor it and adjust it as you go along, and then evaluate and learn from your project. And right now we're at the stage 1, the red stage, the planning stage. We know that most of you have already written your project plan and have your proposal, but your proposal was often written maybe a year ago, and some of you may not have even been involved in writing that proposal. And that is why we give you the opportunity at the beginning to reflect and refine your project plan. There may be new information in your context that you need to take into account to improve or adjust your project plan. And so within the next 3 months, we give, 3 months of your project start date. So for many of you, it's already a month in. So end of November, we expect you to have finalized that plan, designed your data collection methods as best as possible. And then within 6 months, we ask you to collect your baseline data. And this is all in the guidance we'll give you. And then over the 3 years, you will implement the project, you will deliver the results, manage your risks, manage your partners, and you will be asked to report to us every 6 months, and you'll have a month to complete that report. And you will have the opportunity to adjust your plans at least once a year within certain rules. And then after the 3 years, you will collect your final data, complete your final progress report. And if you're a large grant receiver, large grants are those over 150,000, you will be asked to commission and manage a final project evaluation. For organizations receiving a grant less than 150,000, you will not be managing the evaluation. The trust fund will deal with that for you. So these are the key steps in the project management cycle for the UN Trust Fund. And right now we're at the stage 1 of planning, so I'll go into that in more depth. What are the key deadlines and tasks? We want you to finalize and finish your results framework as best as possible within the 3 months of your project start date. You may be very happy with your project results and resources framework. If so, you don't have to do anything. You can just tell your portfolio manager, I'm happy with it, and they will reflect on it, and maybe there will be no changes to make. So don't feel you have to make changes. We also ask you to refine and improve your indicators, how you're going to measure, and next week's session will go into that in more depth. You will design your data collection methods and tools, develop ethical and safety protocols for those, and we don't ask to see all of your protocols. We just need to see a selection for the riskiest data collection methods. We ask you to collect baseline data as far as possible within the first 6 months, and we have a whole guidance note on that. And then you will do your first progress report about the first 6 months at 7 months. So today's session is focused on the results and resources framework part of these requirements. So what is a results and resources framework? Some of you may know this as called a logical framework or a log frame. There are different ways of describing this, but it simply translates your plan, which was a bunch of narrative. If you've read your proposal, it's strategies and context and background, and nobody wants to read through all of that every day and try and monitor that. So the results and resources framework takes that plan and puts it in a very practical format that you can monitor step by step, that's timed and budgeted. And then you can use this framework to guide your reporting and monitoring so you can assess success, and it's something the external evaluator can use. So you may have a similar framework that you're using already for previous projects, and we hope that you're able to use our style of the framework quite easily. It might look a bit overwhelming at first glance, but we're going to try and break it down for you now. It has two sections. It has the resources side, which is the money and the activities, and it has the results side. So as I said, the results side is the change that you want to see for women and girls and for the beneficiaries and those you work with. The resources and the activities is really what you do and the inputs. Today's session is mainly going to focus on the results. We will come back to the budget in the financial management session in a couple of weeks. Results and resources frameworks are very, very useful for planning, monitoring, and evaluation, but also for learning. And we don't want you to be afraid of things going wrong. It's important to understand if a project is successful and if it's a failure, well, if things go wrong and why. If you don't have a results and resources framework or similar step-by-step plan, you won't necessarily understand why something worked or why it didn't. You can only fully understand whether a project was planned well to help repeat or avoid the same journey if you have a plan that you followed and monitored. So in this example on the page, if you were only talking about your activities and saying, oh yeah, I'm going to train some women, and suddenly women are safer from violence, you would have this blind spot, this blank space. I think, well, how did that happen? If women do seem to be safer from violence, you won't know why. Was it really just the training? Are you sure? There could have been other factors. So if it fails, you won't know why. And if it works, it's hard to know why if you have that gap in your plan. So we use the results framework to fill in these steps so that we could all learn together what's worked and what hasn't and why. And the backbone of the results and resources framework is what we call the results chain, which, if you've looked at your project plan, is the first page. The very first page of the results framework in your proposal is a boxed graphic that sets out your project goal, your outcomes, your outputs. And then lower down in the document, you'll find your activities and budget. The results chain is a planning tool, and it also helps you visualize the step-by-step progress. And at the top of the chain is the change that you want to see in the lives of women and girls. Below that are the steps that you want to take to get there, at the outcomes and the outputs. And I'm going to explain the terminology in case you don't understand that. But basically, it's the building blocks. It's the preconditions. You have to have money. We all need money. And then that money delivers activities. And you do some training or you do some other activities. From that achieves something, some small change, the output. And then hopefully a group of outputs will lead to outcomes. And then that will lead to your goal. So it's step-by-step change, and the results chain method helps you visualize that. I can't go into this in all greatest depth, but this is in your guidance. On the screen now and on page 2 of your guidance, you will see the explanation of what is a goal, what is an outcome, what is an output. The project goal is always the highest change that you aim to achieve in your project. And for UN Trust Fund projects, we ask you to focus on the change in the lives of women and girls, that their lives will get better somehow. They will be better protected. They will feel safer. They will have access to services. They will have improved agency and empowerment. You may not This may be very ambitious, but we ask that you keep that goal in mind so that everything else contributes to that. We expect you to make some progress towards the goal, but we don't expect you to achieve the goal fully. It's very unlikely. We keep the eye on the ball, but if you want to try and make women and girls safer, it's slightly out of your hands. So we expect you to make some progress towards the goal, but if you don't achieve the goal in the 3 years, that's understandable because it is a very ambitious goal. The outcome is the step towards that. In order to change the lives of women and girls, you often have to change a community. You have to encourage a community to respect the rights of women and girls. Or you have to put in place a law or a policy to help better protect women and girls. So the outcome is the step towards change for women and girls. And we describe that as changes in attitudes, behaviors, or resources and responses of systems and institutions. So it's something that can't really be achieved until 2 or 3 years. So the project goal is something that you may achieve in 3 years or longer. The outcomes you may not achieve for a year or 2. And then below that is the output. And the output is something that you really should be able to deliver immediately. So for example, this training. I would hope this training immediately helps change your knowledge, and that is an output. So the results chain is the step-by-step process. And think of it as you can think of it in a timed way, that I see outputs as something that you might be able to achieve after 6 months to a year. Outcomes are things that you can achieve after 2 to 3 years. The project goal would be something that you achieve after a year or 3 years or more at the end of the project. So that explanation is in your guidance, and we encourage you to read the guidance and then check against how you've written your results chain. Is your results chain adhering to these definitions? You may have received guidance when you wrote your proposal, and you may have already improved the way that you've drafted. This comes from best practice, and I will come to that in a minute. We're not telling you this just to adhere to the trust funds rules. We're telling you this because it has been proven to be effective in project management. So adhering to these definitions can help you use the results chain effectively to work out, well, what steps will it take to achieve change in your environment? And another tool that can help you in this process of thinking about change is theory of change. And I've given you a website that's very, very good, www.theoryofchange.org, with a lot of resources. Theory of change is essentially a comprehensive description, an illustration of how and why a desired change is expected to happen in a particular context. And it's simply a process of mapping out what kind of change you want to achieve that then you can build your results chain on. So in your cases, if you see at the bottom of the screen, you know there's a problem. There's a problem in your community. There's violence against women, and maybe it's domestic violence, maybe it's sexual harassment in the streets, but there's a specific problem. And you know that your goal is to change that. But there are many different pathways to achieve change. And before you wrote your proposal, or before your organization wrote your proposal, they may have, they should have thought about all the different ways to get to change. They may have come up with a project idea A. Oh, this is a good idea. They may have come up with a different project, project B or project C, but they decided to come to the trust fund and tell us, we want to do this idea. They came with one, your organization came with one pathway to change. But there may be many different pathways to change. In your results framework and your project plan, you gave us one journey, one pathway, but there may be other pathways. And the theory of change can help you map this out. So it's a process of getting together as a team, reflect on what was in your project plan originally, like a year ago that you wrote it, and then reflect on it and say, well, is that still true? Is it still true that this activity will lead to this output, will lead to this outcome? If not, maybe there's a different pathway. There's a different activity that you could have done, you could be doing, a different output. There may be a different project, slightly different project idea. We don't want you to revise your project too far. You can't change your project goal. You can't change your budget. But what you can do is reflect on your theory, reflect on the different pathways to change. And if as a team you decide, oh, you know what, we forgot that we should be working with this stakeholder. We should be working with this local community organization that's just arrived. Or maybe there will be a risk. Maybe there's a risk that the government has changed, that the people that you're working with in the Ministry of Women's Affairs have changed, and now that's a barrier, and you need to change an activity or an output. And this is your chance to reflect on the theory. So a good tip I will give is that get together as a team after this session, get your results chain out, step back, reflect on it, and say, well, what did we forget? What did we miss? What is new? Is this plan still valid? Are the outputs, outcomes, and goal still achievable? Is there something new and unexpected that's arrived? And then, if you need to change something, you can come to the Trust Fund and explain why. And then you decide this is your results chain. So within these 3 months, we want you to do that thinking to make sure that you're very clear on your project plan and we all are on the same page. On the screen now is an example of a mapping. So as I said, you could get together with your team and map out your journey of change for your project. In this example, the goal of the project is to provide employment for domestic violence survivors. So they had identified a problem that women who are domestic violence survivors had not been able to get employment. And they have mapped out from the bottom the types of activities they can do: counseling, training, talk to employees. And from that, they've mapped out what change that will lead to, that women attending training can get internships. And then from then, the women getting an internship means that they will have skills to get a job. And then from there, they will have employment. So the first, a thing that you can do as an organization is map out step by step your process of change for women. Then you can label them. You can label them project goal. You can label them, well, that's an outcome. That's that's defined as an outcome, and that's defined as an output. So you can do it in many different ways, but definitely taking a step back and mapping out your theory again might be helpful for you, and then label it, well, this is a goal, this is an outcome, this is an output. And if you want any help or guidance with this, that's what I'm here for, that's what the portfolio manager is here for. So yes, this slide helps give you a few examples of how you could map out your journey of change, and then you could reflect on it and label it, well, this is an activity, an output, or outcome, and so forth. And then you can put it into the results chain in the system. As I mentioned in the principles section, you should always refer to existing evidence and research on violence against women. You're not alone, and many organizations will be doing the same thing. And we'll have a whole module on using knowledge. We do have what's called a knowledge hub in UN Women, which is an online resource which you can search for different methodologies, which I will send you after this. So we recommend you familiarize yourself with new evidence and research on violence against women. But on the screen now, I'm just showing you a very common model of change change towards ending violence against women. And that's what's called the ecological model. Now, you don't have to be a researcher or a technical expert to understand this. And many of you are very aware of this, that to change the lives of women and girls and to end violence against women, you may have to change attitudes and behaviors at the individual level. You may need to help change the woman herself to have more empowerment. You may need to focus on changing relationships between men and women or within the family. You may need to focus on change in the community to make them aware of the rights of women, or you may need to make changes at the broader society level, an institutional level, in working with the government, for example. So as you're reflecting on your theory of change, consider, well, what level are you working at? And the way I describe the project goal, the project outcomes and outputs can be assigned to those different levels. It's not necessary for you to operate at all these levels. Do not be too ambitious. But you should choose interventions that will complement each other at different levels. So if you have a number of outputs working on changing individuals, changing their own knowledge, changing men's knowledge, changing women's knowledge, have you also considered then what happens then in the community or what happens in the society? So if you're helping to improve a woman's individual knowledge of her rights, where can she go after that to get help? Is there something that you need to help put in place in the community so that she can do something with that new knowledge, that there isn't a brick wall? And we've had projects in the past where women have been made aware of their rights, but then they have nowhere to go for help. So do consider what the research and evidence is saying on working with violence against women and what level you're working at. It doesn't have to be you as an organization that solves all the issues. You can be working with other organizations. So do use evidence and consider how you're trying to influence change at different levels. An example then of putting in practice the theory of change and reflection of change at different levels is now on the screen. And here the project goal is that women and girl survivors of violence in Brazil experience improved health, safety, and well-being. I'm only showing one outcome here because of space, but typically a project would have 2 or 3 outcomes. But in this project, they decided to try and improve the health of women and girls through working with health service providers. And they were wanting to focus on improving the service providers' capacity. So they're working at the institutional level, change at the institutional level to improve the capacity of the health service providers. So that's very much an outcome. At the outcome, as I mentioned before, you're looking at changes in institutions, changes in the community, or changes at, say, in service providers and their ability to provide support to women and girls. So how will they improve the capacity? Capacity is something that's hard to define, and your outputs should help define that. To improve the capacity of the service providers, they decided to work on 3 outputs. Perhaps in the first year of the project, they're going to help health service providers put in place policies and referral mechanisms so that women and girls can be referred to the correct service providers. They're going to help improve confidentiality and privacy within the health service community. They're going to work with health service providers and provide them with training to improve their knowledge and skills. So to achieve this higher level change of service providers providing better services to women survivors, they're looking at changing policies, changing the quality of the services, and providing training to improve knowledge and skills. So things like improving capacity is never as simple as saying, oh, we're going to improve their capacity. You can use the results chain to unpack that. So when we come to read your results chain, if we see terminology such as improving capacity, we will ask you to unpack it. We will expect to see several stages of your outputs to explain, well, how do you improve capacity of a service provider, for example. So this is just one example, but you might want to reflect on your results chain and consider, well, if I have written something like improving someone's capacity, is it very explained in a very clear way? Another thing that I've highlighted on this screen is that there's a big circle and a yellow box saying your organization's sphere of influence. We do not expect you to achieve all of this alone. Changing the experience of women and girls, changing institutions is very ambitious. You as an organization can only really be held accountable for the results in your control. And that is mainly the output level. So in this example, you're not the health service provider. You're very rarely the health service provider. You may work with the government or with service providers, but you don't really have full control over what they decide to do. So your influence may only be that you help provide the training to help improve the capacity. But if you plan your project well, you monitor it well, you adjust your project, there's more likelihood that whatever you do will encourage change at the higher levels. But when we come to review your results chain, it's just a reminder that project goal, we don't expect you to achieve this alone. Outcomes is not something that you achieve alone. There's always other partners involved. And the next slide reinforces and reminds you of that. The influence of your project is really about the money, the activities, and the outputs. We want you to plan your project with the goal in mind. Changing the lives of women and girls is the higher level ambitious goal. But when we come to review your reports, we won't judge you if you don't achieve everything that you said in your project goal, because it's not fully under your control. Women and girls have their own autonomy to make their own decisions. At the outcome level, partners are often involved. Government can be involved. You can't control the government in entirety. So when we come to hold you accountable for the project, we're going to be holding you accountable for the outputs. We will be looking at your contribution to outcomes and the goal as well, but we won't hold you fully accountable. So I just want you to be reassured of that as you're planning your project and we ask you to write a very clear project goal, a very clear outcome, we do know that you're not doing this alone. But when it comes to writing your outputs, please do make sure it's something that you can really achieve as an organization. So as you go through these steps of reflecting on your results chain, I have already suggested that you use the theory of change model. You also look at the influence of your project and make sure that you're not trying anything too ambitious. We then suggest that you also test the results chain by asking some of these questions. And this is all in the guidance, but once you've revised your results chain or reflect on it, just ask yourself these questions. Do the outputs, outcomes, and the project goal really describe what you're trying to achieve? Are they understandable? Are they clear? I often say a simple test would be, if you gave it to your grandmother, would she understand it? Give it to your friends. Give your results chain to your friend who doesn't work in the field of violence against women. If someone can't understand it, who's not involved in the project, then there might be a problem, because clarity helps you plan and monitor. And you also have to consider that, heaven forbid, you left the organization tomorrow and someone new arrived, they need to pick up that project project results chain and that project results framework, and they need to understand it. Does your goal clearly describe the change in the lives of women and girls? We don't expect you to achieve this alone, but we should all keep the focus on improving the lives of women and girls. Do all your outcomes and outputs describe changes, results? And is it logical? Does each step lead to the next? Is the money the right amount of money to achieve the activities? Are these activities going to achieve the outputs? Is it logical that these outputs will achieve the outcomes and the goal? Are there any steps missing? Some steps you might not be able to describe in a simple results chain, so you can describe the steps in the narrative. These kind of steps, I mean, are things like risk management. It's sometimes quite hard to explain in a results chain. Okay, well, I'm going to deliver this output, which is writing a new policy for the police in dealing with sexual harassment cases, but you may have a specific risk that you think that the police officer you're working with are going to change in 6 months. You might have to write that risk somewhere else. So you can't reflect everything in the results chain, but please use the rest of your project document, if you wish, to make notes. Is there anything you've missed? Any activities you've missed? Any outputs? Often we find that people do miss activities. We would not expect to see just one activity to one output. To deliver an output, it does take a few activities. For example, if you simply say an output could be that you're going to sensitize the community, that the community will understand the rights of women and girls, that takes several activities. Step 1 might be going into the community and making the contacts that you need. Step 2 might be getting the authority from the government to even enter the community. Step 3 would then be the training. Step 4 might be the refresher training. So there might be a number of steps. Is each statement, as written, very clear, specific, achievable? It's very useful to put months and dates in the results that you wish to achieve something by May 28, 2019. Make it time-bound, and make sure it's easily understood. So do reflect on your results chain over the next few months and make sure that it's very clear and meets all these criteria. We're nearly at the end of the session. So here are just a few final tips. We recommend you review and check the types of violence that you're focused on. As I mentioned earlier, don't be overambitious. Don't try and target too many forms of violence. Make sure that you're targeting violence that you understand. If you're trying to target both domestic violence within the home as well as sexual harassment in the community, for example, will you be stretching yourself too thin? Do you have the capacity to do all of that? Make sure that you're clear on the types of beneficiaries that you're targeting and the numbers. Don't be too ambitious. Also, if you're focused on a type of beneficiary, we will expect you to have a strategy for targeting them. So if you have ticked that you're focused on women and girls with disability, we'll expect you to know exactly how to reach out to women and girls with disability, how to target them, how to include them, how to put in place the right requirements to make sure that people can take part in your projects. The project goal must refer to these primary beneficiaries. It's very helpful in your goal to say we are working to reduce violence against women and girls with disabilities specifically, or we're working to reduce violence against Indigenous women. Make the goal very specific. And likewise, the outcomes should be very specific about the types of secondary beneficiary you're targeting. And as a reminder, I said the outputs are things that you're accountable for, that you probably should be achieved within 1 to 2 years. All of these tips are in the guidance, but I just wanted to add them all here. What you can do, if you don't have many changes to make to your results framework, you can just drop an email to your portfolio manager and say that. If you reflect on your results framework and you feel that you have significant changes to make, we can download your results framework from the grants management system into an Excel sheet. It's not possible for you to do that yourself, sadly. If you want to get your results framework into an Excel, which is easier to make changes than offline, please email your portfolio manager and ask them to download the results framework and send it to you in Excel. You can then make changes in the Excel sheet and highlight them, send it back to your portfolio manager, who will review it and approve it offline, and then you can make the changes in the system. If you don't have many changes to make, or your changes are very minor, please simply email your portfolio manager within the 3 months and say, for example, this was one output, but we've decided to change the wording. So you could say output 1.1 was blah, 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 but now we want to change the wording to read this. So if you have simple changes, you can simply put it in an email, and then your portfolio manager will approve it, and then you can make changes into the grants management system. If you want to make substantial changes, we recommend you ask for the results framework in an Excel sheet. In all cases, you will make any changes directly into the grants management system, and then we save it and lock it in the system. But we recommend that you do the first round of changing offline via email or Excel. It saves you having to do too many changes in the system, which can be tedious. As a reminder, please don't change your budget. You cannot change your budget, your grant award or your budget per year, and we highly recommend you do very limited changes to anything that affects the budget. So what we're looking at is any changes to the results chain. And finally, why do we put all this focus on your results framework and your results chain? Well, it's because we want to learn. As I said, we want to learn what's working and what's not. And without a clear plan, without a clear results chain, it's very hard to assess, well, did your project do something unique? Did it do something amazing that changed the lives of women and girls? And at the end of the project, for all large grants, you will manage a final evaluation. Small grantees receiving $150,000 or less will have a evaluation potentially, but managed by the trust fund. And the evaluators will be answering these questions. And it's quite useful to look at these questions now as you're reflecting and revising your project plan. For example, the first question an evaluator will have to answer about your entire project at the end of the project is, to what extent was the project goal, outcomes and outputs achieved? Now, if you haven't written those goals, outcomes and outputs very well, if that goal outcome is not clear, if they were overambitious, then there's no way the evaluator can reflect and assess your project fairly. The same with the other questions. Relevance. The evaluator will come at the end of the project and reflect, were the results achieved relevant to the women and girls? If you don't reflect now, well, is my project plan still relevant? Then in 3 years, it's going to be too late. And when the evaluator comes in, they will not be assessing your project on a fair basis. It's also good to say that we will cover this in next week's session on planning for project, planning data collection. But you can be thinking about hiring the evaluator or hiring specialists now, if you wish. If you wish to work with a university, an academic, or a specific company to help you plan the project collect data collection and do the evaluation. You can do that from the very start of the project if you wish and if you have the budget. So it's useful to consider these questions as you reflect. And the last criteria that the evaluator will assess your project on is gender equality and human rights, which comes right back to the programming principles I mentioned. To what extent did your project have a human rights-based and gender-responsive approach? So now is the time at the beginning of the project to consider this. But, as I said, if you don't have anything to change, you have nothing to do. So, to recap, this is the last slide. By the end of November, for most of you, because your project started in September, you have the opportunity to look at your results and resources framework. Is your results chain logical? Does it include measurable indicators? You will have a chance to update it. And you can update it by emailing your portfolio manager and explaining the changes you want to make before doing it in the system. The next step after that will be providing the data collection methods and tools, and next week's session is dedicated to that, as well as the ethical and safety protocols. And then within the 6 months, you'll collect baseline data. So these are the requirements within the first 6 months. So today's session has focused on step 1, the results and resources framework. I hope that I've explained our terminology, why we use the results chain, why we use the results and resources framework, and given you some tips on how to reflect on that and improve it as an organization. And now we will turn to questions. So I'm going to stop sharing. Thank you for your patience. It's a long session. For many of you, as I said, it might not be new for you at all. So now I'm going to turn to questions, and because there's quite a lot of you online, I'm going to ask you to use the chat box. So you can use, hopefully you can see on the right-hand side of your screen, you can ask questions. So type your questions in. Or we might try and do it verbally. Why don't you just, what I'd ask you to do is in chat, let me know if you have a question. And then I'll take you off mute, if possible. Actually, but then people can't always, yeah, no, that's fine. So if you have a question, please let me know in the chat box. And if possible, I will take you off mute so that you can ask the question, so we can hear your voice. So any questions on project planning? Okay, so a question from Andrew. Okay, Andrew asked, just to be clear, we can change the budget lines, but not the overall budget amounts per year on the overall budget. At this stage, as you're revising your results framework, there is scope to change some of the budgets at the activity level. We try and ask you not to do that more than 20%, if possible, not to make major changes. But if you have significant changes you want to make, please write to the portfolio manager. At this stage, at the beginning of project, there might be more scope to adjust budgets between activities before it's locked in the system. But we do ask you to keep that at a minimum. During the rest of the year, you will only be able to vary between activities, budget lines for activities under 20% without approval. Eunice asks, can we present outputs in numbers, e.g. 50 women trained on human rights? Yes, it does help to add numbers in your outputs. However, that's usually what we call the target. So when we'll cover this a bit more next week, but in the output statement itself, you would say, well, again, and remember that the output should be the change you're trying to achieve. So why are you training women on human rights? That's an activity. The fact that you're training 50 women is simply an activity. What is the situation you hope to change? And I expect that you want to train women on human rights because you want to improve their knowledge. You want them to know that they have rights. So at the output level, you should be saying women have an improved understanding of their rights. Then in the target, you can say 50 women now have an improved understanding of their rights. The way you would measure that is you would have to do some kind of survey like this, or like the surveys I send you, or if they don't read or write, we can find a different method. But an output would not be 50 women trained. That would be an activity. So I hope that's a bit clearer. And we're going to cover this a bit more next week. From Jacqueline, I'm just going to copy these so everyone can see them. Jacqueline asked, just a clarification, the first report should be on data collection tools we use on a survey in the next quarter. The first, I'll define between reports and what we want. The progress report is only every 6 months. The formal reporting is every 6 months. When I say that we want to see data collection tools, it's not a report. You just simply have to email us a copy. So if you're doing an interview with beneficiaries, with survivors of violence, we want to see the interview questions and the protocol. So you can just simply email them to us. But we don't need to see them all, only the ones that are very sensitive. And this will be covered in the next week's session, and I have a guidance note to explain all of that. But your first formal report will only be at the 6-month stage. I hope that's clear. Among Eunice asked, would like more light on the ecological model. Yes, it's very interesting, and there's a lot of research and evidence out there on violence against women. So we will have a whole session on human rights-based approaches to ending violence against women and where to find knowledge, and that will be in a few weeks, but I haven't been able to cover that. But I can send you some links to reading on that. Unfortunately, someone's audio device failed, but you're following the slides. That's great. Someone asked so that we can change the work plan in a year. Yes, we ask you to try and minimize major changes to your work plan until once a year. So when you do your annual report, you will have the opportunity to reflect on last year and think, okay, well, we need to make some changes. And so you will have a formal annual work plan that you can revise once a year. But what you have is a wonderful opportunity right now that we're giving you in these first 3 months is that if you want to make any changes now, you can make them to the entire 3 years in terms of the results chain. But after that, you will have to wait. There are opportunities to make changes every 6 months, to be honest, when you do reporting, but we don't want to cause you too much hard work. So it's sometimes better to wait and do a major change every 12 months. Things like changing indicators, changing results, I would do that once a year after this. But this is because the system is open right now, we're giving you the opportunity to make some changes now. Eunice has asked, do we have to email these data collection tools before collecting the data? Yes, preferably yes. We know that for some of you, you may already have established projects, be collecting data already, have already collected data. That's fine. We don't want you to stop doing things that you've already started. But this is about risk for us is about risk management. So we have had projects in the past that were collecting data from survivors, for example, in a way that did harm, asking survivors sensitive questions that could re-traumatize them. So the only reason that we're asking to see these data collection tools is basically to give them a one quick look and to see that, yes, we know that your organization understands ethics and safety. We know that when you go and speak to survivors, you know how to do it, and you know how to do it safely and ethically. So we will not spend too long on this. We can't help you write the data collection tools. What we're doing is a risk mitigation. We're just having a look at them, and then we can advise you. If we think that you're doing something that might cause harm, we have the chance to discuss that. So yes, you can simply email any tools you already have that you plan to use and your ethical and safety protocols. You can send them to your portfolio manager and they will send them to me. Once we have a view of a few of them, we will get a good understanding of whether your organization understands ethics and safety. And then we won't look at them again. We won't bother you. We'll leave you to it. It's just this first few months we want to have reassurance that you do understand ethics and safety. Hi Hassan, hi everyone. Okay, so Hassan says, in our project we program a basic study that will allow us to better identify the problem and our theory of change with our results and objectives, and also target the population. But this study will be programmed, but the results will be after the 3-month period. Okay, yes, some of you may decide to do what we call a baseline study or some research. That sometimes could be part of your project. Sometimes research is a project activity. More likely it should be the baseline study, and you might hire a consultant to help you. Yes, that's fine. And therefore, if you don't have the results within the 3-month period, please let your portfolio manager know, and we can make adjustments. As I said, the baseline needs to be entered within the first 6 months. I would question though, when you say better identify the problem and your theory of change, I think we just need to talk you through that, because we do expect that some of your theory is already determined, because you have submitted a proposal to us and you have submitted a project idea. Therefore, you can't completely change your project, but you might want to do some more research, particularly on a particular target population, or you might need to do some research to get a baseline study. But sometimes that research could be considered a project activity, and sometimes it's just getting the baseline. So I would suggest that you contact your portfolio manager and just explain what you're trying to do under the basic study, whether that's fulfilling the baseline or whether that's fulfilling an activity for the project. To give you a further example, some projects might do research to inform the government or to use as an advocacy tool. So you might do a research study, or part of your baseline could be to identify what the extent of violence against a disadvantaged community. And then using that study can be very powerful for advocacy, which might actually be one of your outputs. But that's slightly different than collecting data for your baseline. And your baseline has to cover the entirety of the project. So what we will expect to see within the next 6 months is baseline data for each indicator, for each output, outcome, and the goal. So these are 2 slightly different things. I hope that's clear. So yes, you will have to wait. In the question, Hassan, you're saying that you might not have the baseline, the study for after 3 months, but we would expect you to have other data for your project. So let's discuss that offline. Sharing ethical and safety protocols, yes, so we just need to see, so for example, an interview guide. If you're interviewing someone, we would normally expect you to have It's very simple. Like at the beginning of an interview, if I was interviewing you saying, please tell me your opinion on the government's position on ending violence, the first thing I would say to you is, this is confidential. What your rights are as a participant, that I'm only interviewing you to inform the project. So an ethical and safety protocol in that pace would be just one paragraph thing that you as the project staff would read, or your monitoring staff would read to the person you're interviewing. So ethical safety protocols can be a range of things. They can be both an umbrella document that sets out how you look after data and how you ensure the safety of participants. But in addition, you would expect to see a protocol for each data collection method, whether that's something that the interviewee would read, or the confidentiality or data document, the document you would ask beneficiaries to sign to give their permission. So next week's session will cover all of this. We have several more sessions. Oh, someone asked, what are the implications of getting less than 90% in the survey for the tests of the modules? So that's different. There's no, we're not going to come find you. There's not. Just keep trying. Basically, if you're a focal point for your project, so many of you, if you're the actual project manager for the UN Trust Fund project, we do expect you to pass the tests. So just keep trying. If you don't pass the tests, it simply means that you probably don't fully understand the UN Trust Fund's requirements, and that just gives us a red flag that maybe we need to spend more time with you. So the only implication would be that we would probably have more one-on-one discussions with you via Skype. We would try and help you understand the requirements, because we don't want you to get to a year's time and still not understand, for example, what's the project goal, or I still don't understand what the trust fund. So the only implications is that we will give you more attention in terms of building capacity. But what we suggest is you just keep trying the survey. Just redo the survey. If you get less than 90%, just do it again, because it actually tells you the answers. So you can learn by doing it again. Oswat Martin asks, is it okay to change some of the results and resources to consider after the baseline has been conducted? Yes, well, as I said, the project documents are always management tools that are flexible. So once you collect the baseline within 6 months, and you might already have baseline data, so this isn't relevant to everyone, but for those who need to collect baseline, you might then decide, oh, I need to change a target, I need to change, and that's what we will do every 6 months or every year. You will have the opportunity to change your project plan to the extent feasible. So yes, you may, after the baseline comes in, decide to remove an activity or add an activity, and that is absolutely feasible. But as I said, we try and restrict major changes to only once a year. Okay, I think I've come to the end of the questions. Any further questions? As I said, next week's session will cover a lot of the questions you've asked. So next week we will talk about indicators, data collection methods, and we actually have a whole separate session on ethics and safety as well. But as I said, it's not about us trying to check everything you do. It's just about risk management. We're all in this together. We all want everyone to be safe. And we have a lot of tools to share with you. So after this, I will also be sharing with you our webpage where you can find data collection tools. We have so many examples. This has been done before. We have focus group guides, we have interview guides, questionnaires in different languages. So we have good examples to share with you. You're not in this alone. Let's use each other's knowledge. Look at all the people online right now. So at any point you say, you know what, I really don't know how to measure this result, just ask us and we can use each other's knowledge to find a way. And we want people to do things as cheaply and efficiently and as easily as possible. We don't want you to be having to work too hard, too long hours. We don't want you to get burnt out. So think about your capabilities of your project staff. When we look at the results chain, and one thing that I haven't mentioned is really think about, as I said, the realism. You shouldn't have to be working 24 hours a day, and neither should the rest of your team. So that's another reason to reflect on your results chain against your capabilities, and let us know if it was over ambitious. Because when people write proposals, they want it to look good because that's the way they think that the money will come in. And we know that in reality, when it gets to, okay, now I've been past this project document and I have to deliver it, it's that stage that you realize, oh, hang on a minute, I cannot achieve all of this. So this is the time. This is the time for us to all reflect on that project plan. And says Eunice, I will be sending the information on the data collection. Yes, let me copy that down. Yes. There's no, by the way, there's no requirement for you to do a baseline survey. Again, I will cover this. There is a distinction between doing a baseline survey and collecting baseline data. Surveys are things that you go out and ask questions of people, and you go perhaps door to door or something. That might not be what you need to do. You might need to go and collect service statistics from the local hospital. You might need to do interviews. You might need to do other things. And you don't necessarily need to do, say, for example, a household survey. So yes, Eunice, it might be good if we touch base offline to see what you're going to be aiming to do in your baseline survey. We want you to keep it as simple as possible, as cost effective and as efficient as possible. Right, well, we're nearly at the end, so unless there's further questions, I will close. If any of the portfolio managers online want to add, we have Lorna online from Asia Pacific, and we have, I think that's it. So if anybody wants to add, otherwise I shall close. Give you a second to breathe. Oh, yes, I think, yes. Angelina, I don't think I answered your question. Major changes, is anything affecting the budget above 20% per activity line? Yes, major changes between activity lines of 20%. Thank you. Okay, that's it. Doesn't seem to be any more questions, so I'll say goodbye. Goodbye, everyone. Thank you for attending. Good luck with your project plans, and we will follow up with further information. And of course, there will be next week's session. So, thank you. Bye.